a very, very important topic in today's world, primarily because talking about data privacy is one part, right? Where you have the law, you have the adherence, you have the processes, and so on. But how do you enable data privacy? It's only because of privacy enhanced engineering, all right? Privacy engineering is the subject. It is a subject where you build a culture of privacy into the organization, starting from operations through technology, and build applications, put the right security controls and so on and so forth into the privacy ecosystem, privacy posture of your organization. That's what privacy engineering is about. A couple examples before I hand it over is when you build an application, how do you encrypt data? Do you do a database level encryption? Do you do a column level encryption or a field level encryption and so on? How do you put in controls from a CISO perspective? Do you have the right DLP in place? How do you protect data from going out and so on? Okay, so privacy engineering should be the DNA of the organization, and that is what Krishna and team are going to look into. And thank you for the panels for accepting this initiative of talking about privacy engineering. Especially with AI, it becomes that much more challenging. Privacy by design itself is a concept within the privacy engineering ecosystem, but privacy engineering as such is the end-to-end implementation of all these aspects of privacy by design and so on. So handing it over to Krishna, I think a wonderful session ahead of you. Please ensure you get the best out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jagan. Thank you for that introduction. I think all of us have probably heard about privacy by design by now, or maybe a consultant has told you about it if you've not heard about it so far. But the bigger question is, what is compliance by design? Have we ever thought of maybe looking at it from a compliance perspective so that we can put in compliance measures and shift compliance left, traditionally how we shift security left, right? So adding on to that, my first question is to Dr. Yusuf Hashmi. So what is your opinion? What role do you think privacy by design plays in the development of AI systems under the DPDPA? Now, my question also is from a perspective that under the GDPR, we have it's used as a benchmark everywhere. Similarly, we now have the EU AI Act as well. So what role do you feel privacy by design has when we are building AI systems, and how does DPDPA impact it?
Thank you so much, and thanks for being here. I think DPDP as such, there's no mandate for privacy by design, which we were expecting that it should have happened, but somehow it doesn't mean that we should not disregard the importance of designing, right? A very clear analogy is that when you create a house or you create a blueprint of your house, you ensure that the privacy perspective, any builder, or you yourself, you're building your own house, you make sure that the privacy of your house, every section of your house, you ensure that the privacy is being actually created in a way that it would not be able to actually impede my privacy. So that's how in the design phase, when you build a structure, you ensure that your necessary curtains are in place so that my privacy. So I think privacy by design is there already as something that we need to inculcate into the data privacy, what we are actually talking about. I think because it's an extension of security by design, I think that concept itself is taking not at that maturity level itself. So how there's a new regime of privacy has come now. So how do you actually create another regime, incubate that into my designing, right? At my development stage, at my design, development, production. So it's just not about managing the development life cycle. You are also dealing with your life cycle of your privacy data, right? It's just not design. So you have to consider all the aspects. I think very important is the minimization of the data. When you design in software, it's a must, because how much data that I need to process, which means that it will burden my systems, it will actually have impact on my resources. So how do we ensure that I design privacy application or software to ensure privacy as much as minimize of the data is very important. Anonymization and pseudo-anonymization, I think there's a point of discussion that's very, very important. I give you an example that Aadhaar, right? There's a virtual ID, right? It's a great example of pseudo-anonymization, which means that I am referring a data set to the actual Aadhaar number, but I'm still able to maintain that. Yes, there's a mapping between my VID and my Aadhaar ID. So it's a great example of pseudo-anonymization. And anonymization have, there are multiple techniques for anonymization itself, right? And the third one is important aspect is the security measures, right? Just very simple, because that's where you can see the security has always been there. And in this aspect also, you have to ensure protection of your data. You have to ensure defense and depth when you are designing a privacy by design application or a capability, right? So it's very much important. And then when you actually have that, this transparency, right? So this is something which is different than security by design, because we are actually dealing with data, yes, of course, but there's a privacy has been added to it. That's where it actually uniquely identifies itself, that when you talk about data, the transparency I might not need because there's a business data. Because when it comes to privacy, who becomes the owner of the data is myself, right? So that data has to be very transparent. While, of course, the business data, I'm not the owner. My organization is the owner. But when it comes to privacy, that data set, the transparency has to be there. So there has to be designed and inbuilt in your capability to ensure that my transparency is there. And then finally is the compliance, of course. I think these are 4 or 5 areas are very essentially needed in order to designing and taking an approach of privacy by design concept. I think there's a lot of training and learning and understanding of this privacy regime has to be there under the course of your development team, because that's where they are actually problem lies, because they are not that equipped as a security or a privacy professional as you are. So that's very important to actually, that's how you take a holistic approach.
Right, so I think what we have also noticed, and I'll also ask a question to all the audience here, how many of you have used an AI system so far? Any kind of AI system? Okay, so the ones who are not raising their hand, I feel that you would have, right, on your way to at least the conference. If you have taken a cab, then it is an AI-powered platform. And my question more or less is around to you, Dr. Yusuf, as in, when you look at AI systems and when you look at the privacy by design principles, because the adoption of AI has outpaced the compliance narratives that the organizations wanted to build. So what can be done so that there has to be some kind of balance with that adoption, and at the same time look at the requirements that are coming in from a data privacy perspective? What can tech teams do to maybe talk to their legal teams or talk to their data privacy specific teams to incorporate those design principles in the development of AI systems?
Yeah, because when it comes to AI, I think the major difference is that AI systems produce large volume of data. I think that's the differentiator. When it comes to large volume, you're dealing with terabytes of data. And now you have to pick up which one actually correlates to a privacy data. So that's why AI comes a great use case, right? When it comes to actually design that. So that's how AI will help us to actually identify and segregate my data. Once you know your data, you are able to know that who has access to it and what kind of transparency and consent that I need if that entire large volume data set has. I'll give you a few examples. Apple has a differential, have you heard of Apple's differential privacy? Right, we put down in our iPhones, we complete, there's an autocomplete, right? Which means that by the time you complete, which means that Apple is actually collecting data. So, but the differential privacy will ensure, Apple ensure that my data, that data, the auto is not related to me as an individual. So it ensures that only the content gets actually feed into the system, rest is all remain the same. So my privacy is maintained. Second example is Google's platform, which actually takes the machine learning capability of at the device itself. That's Google federated AI, right? So which will ensure that the data, Google doesn't collect the data, right? Which means that ultimately you have to collect the data and then process and then do the, apply the LLM and then do the algorithms and supply you to the response.
So I would like to take a quick pause there because we have someone from Google who can probably also talk a bit more about how exactly this
Yeah.
is done.
Great.
So I would just pass it over to Shri
Sure.
Pravalika as well. So if you want to add a few points to what Sarah just mentioned around how Google looks into data privacy from a privacy engineering perspective, the floor is open to you.
Really quick to add to what Sir was just mentioning about federated learning, very much about on-device machine learning. So that way we do not like actually transfer user data back to the cloud or to any other other systems. And essentially you're trying to invoke user trust here and make sure that you're transparent about how that data actually flows and so on. So that's one of the technological breakthroughs at that point. For simple things like Gmail autocomplete or like your Gboard and so on, we use federated learning. But other than that, about just in general privacy engineering and like privacy by design and so on. So I feel when GDPR came into effect and so on in 2018, majorly the focus was on treating privacy from the lens of compliance, like doing a bunch of privacy impact assessments. I literally started my career in privacy from moving from security just by doing a bunch of PIAs. And then eventually we realized that there needs to be a shift here. It's not about you asking a question and somebody actually giving you a response about, oh, this is how we receive consent, this is how we're retaining the information, this is when we're deleting and so on. It's more about automation right now, and you have all of these startups who are actually demonstrating about how their tools pretty much automates and gives you a wonderful picture about your privacy, state of compliance in your organization and so on. So I feel like the approach is more from a defensive, from a defensive lens rather than more like a reactive lens, which is how it was before. And I actually work in the incident response side of Google. So we see all the bad things happen. So day in and day out, it's more about seeing how things break. So we are right now focusing more on how do we actually detect these privacy issues from occurring, like before they see the light of the day. And detection, prevention, these come first. And then we can go into, of course, the mitigation and all of that aspect. So yeah, I'll probably pause here because there's a lot
Absolutely.
more for us to talk to.
No, I think there are some specific questions for you as well. I think my next question would be around data anonymization and pseudonymization. We talk about it a lot when we look at privacy by design, or one of the principles of privacy by design. So my question is to Mr. Amit Mathur. How can data anonymization and pseudonymization reduce privacy risks in AI systems, and what are their limitations?
Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Dr. Yusuf talked about anonymization and pseudo-anonymization as one of the principles. I think that's a key thing when we are talking about using data for, say, training the AI systems, or say maybe using the AI systems. And that is where there are various techniques being used to anonymize data, including some of these techniques which have been there for some time. But then there are certain challenges in each of the techniques. And with more and more compute power being available, we're seeing some of these anonymization techniques which we thought were secure enough, and we could ensure that, yes, the data is anonymized and you could not de-anonymize it and come back and figure out the individual associated with the data. Those are taking a hit. And that's where these techniques are constantly evolving. And he's talked about some of these techniques, like Aadhaar is used, some of these techniques which even the RBI has suggested in terms of the cards, the credit card. Those are evolving over the period, and that's something which will constantly evolve, and it has to evolve. The challenge which we are facing today is how do we ensure that the data is protected? One, yes, we're using these anonymization techniques or the pseudo-anonymization techniques, But then again, when we move forward, when we are talking about sharing data sets across, the other problem which we face really is what I feel is a good enough anonymization technique may not be good enough for another entity. And when I'm sharing data across, he may have certain challenges with it, or he's able to decrypt the data and figure it out. So those are the challenges which we are facing, and that's something which is constantly evolving, and we all of us in the industry are working on various techniques how to ensure that the user data is safe.
Absolutely. Right. I think one of the more or most pressing questions around usage of AI systems is how do you make sure that the right to erasure to a data subject or an individual is granted? It's one of the most pressing questions, because how can you untrain models, or what can an AI system not learn anymore, or how does it even work when there are certain data elements that are being purged or being removed from the model? So, Sri Pravalika, what are your thoughts around how does the right to forget or right to erasure work in the context of AI systems? Can an AI model be untrained, and to what extent?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, yes, it's definitely one of the more pressing questions. We've already faced this challenge multiple times. So I think, when you rewind back to like 5-6 years, when you did not really have as much reliance on like these generative models and so on, sure, there was, traditional artificial intelligence and all of that. For instance, let's say you wanted to remove personal information about yourself from the web today. How do we do it? We found a solution to that. At Google, we have like a team working on delisting your information, removing it from search indexes and so on. But when it comes to AI models, it doesn't work it's not like a database where you can go in and remove records. It's actually, these models are trained to generate these results based on patterns that they've been trained on, right? So it's a far more complex problem, and right off the bat, there is no there is no single stop solution for this as yet, and there's a lot more research that is on its way. But from whatever we've learned so far and from experience, when we've seen cases where some models might be behaving in undesirable ways due to certain pieces of information in there. So there is a concept of actually going and trying to remove those information, those pieces of information, by actually teaching the model to remember it differently, basically, altering that in a manner such that it tries to give different results from what it was, and then slowly, iteratively, you try to make it forget. So this is still a work in progress, but of course it's more like a cost benefit analysis, because these things are so expensive, and there's a lot of data. There's a huge amount of data that goes into training these models, and when it means unlearning, it's not as simple as actually trying to delete the whole model or retraining. Retraining itself is expensive. So I guess it depends upon the risk that is involved here, and versus does it make actual sense to go through this cost. But we have been in scenarios where we've decided to pretty much trash a model because there's just far-reaching consequences. So just irrespective of the cost, delete the model, build a new model, and use it for whatever application.
No, I think you're fairly right there. I mean, there is no one-stop solution to this problem statement, and also you would have recently noticed that most of the organizations today are AI powered. Even though I don't specifically know what that means, in what context are they using an AI system? Are they even using it or not? Or is it more of a marketing keyword that they want to use to gain a business advantage? But at the same time, I think I also saw something which was very alarming for me. I was just listening to the radio the other day, and turns out there are AI RJs these days. Right, so there are automated RJs that are coming in, talking about the news, talking about music, talking about some Bollywood gossip. So is AI adoption more of a marketing gimmick, or is it really being used in the context for the benefit of course, the organizations and the individuals whose data is being processed, right? That's also a potentially a
Yeah.
question that we should ask. And I think at this point, I would just take 5 minutes and see if there are any questions from the audience in the middle of this discussion before moving over to the next set of questions. So any question from the audience on privacy risks around AI system, or so whatever we have discussed so far, a quick show of hand. Okay, I hope the topic is not complicated. Perfect. Yeah, I think there's a question there. If you can send the mic. Yeah, I think you're audible.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. So just in case it wasn't audible to everyone, so this gentleman here was just asking us, how do we actually incorporate checks and balances into your system to make sure that you can, you're fairly trying to identify your biases and you're trying to balance it out there. So bias, this is one of the key problems in AI
I think
systems.
we can potentially have a question there before you
Yeah.
deep dive into this. How many of you here think that an AI system should be biased? Okay, that's just one person. Okay.
So are we saying that it should be biased? Is that what the show of hands is? Should not be.
Now I think we can talk about the other
Yeah,
topic.
sure. So before we go into saying whether we should have biases or not and how we should do that, so maybe a quick example here. Let's say you're applying for a loan or for an insurance, right? This is an actual scenario which happened in the US. So we usually apply for car insurance. It goes through its checks and everything, and then it spits out a value saying that this is your monthly insurance amount. Me and my husband actually try to, we have the similar driving histories and all that. Of course he's a few years older than me, but it has its own bias involved in actually giving me a much higher rate than him. So why? Of course it goes through, and we have the same address, we have similar driving records, accident histories and so on. So, and this is just one part of the example. This can go on into people having racial biases and gender biases and much more than that. So fairness in AI systems can actually be included based on your training data. So your model will actually give out information only as good as how your training data is. So one of the ways in which you can actually, let's say you've spotted bias in your system, you can actually try to fine-tune the model by actually incorporating balancing information or balancing training data in there, which can pretty much show the model, basically feed the model more diverse data. That way it can slowly reduce the memorization it has on certain biased elements, and then that way it's a little bit more diverse. That is one way that that's one of the techniques to do it. But I'd like to address more on the checks and balances piece. So the checks and balances is, how do you actually know? It's by testing, by red teaming, and by actually getting feedback directly from the user, right? I'm pretty sure when you've interacted with ChatGPT or Bard or any of these other systems, and even Amazon has its own Rufus. For instance, I ask a question about, hey, can you give me a list of products which can do XYZ, and then it gives me this, and I'm like, oh, where is the explainability feature here? Why are you actually giving me this result versus another result, right? And then if it's biased towards showing me a certain recommendation, you usually have feedback there saying, was this helpful? do you think this accurately solved your question, or like, so on. So that user feedback piece is actually quite powerful, because some users can actually key in there saying that, no, this was not helpful. You were basically biased in like showing me a certain result. And then that, on the flip side, on the other end, internally, we actually take user feedback quite seriously, and customer feedback can actually be helpful in like, pretty much closing that feedback loop there, and trying to rework the systems to see, okay, what's the root cause of this issue, and so on. So yeah, feedback is just one of the ways to do it. But
Right. I think building on that, because we're talking about governance as a piece as well, my next question would be to Mr. Praveen. Praveen sir, I think the first piece that I want you to help the audience understand as well is that your designation is very unique, and it's also fascinated me and a lot of other people when it was introduced. So it's Chief Market Information Security Officer. So if you could just start with throwing some light on that, and what exactly does the role entail, and how is it different from a CISO role that we see in the industry? And then I think I would also have another question around the governance piece for you.
Yeah, I think interesting question. So you have not taken consent for asking this question. But yeah, so it's called CMISO. So it's a CISO, definitely. My core role is CISO, plus market risk. So NPCI has number of partners, right? So my left, my right, and everywhere they are hooking to get this digital payment service enabled, right? So this ecosystem risk, or the market risk, or we say that right, the supply chain risk. Yeah, so they all are connected to NPCI, and this is my additional kind of responsible to monitor the ecosystem, what's happening across the digital payment across ecosystem in India, and see that we can predict some market risk, and we can fine tuning our policy, process, security controls, compliance requirement within NPCI. So this is all about CMISO, so CISO plus market risk. And I will also taking the additional responsibility called DPO, Data Protection Officer, since I played that role in the past. I think I have privilege to work one of the largest European bank called Barclays in 2018, where I initiated lots of activities to comply with the GDPR on that. So I have gained little bit experience on the privacy side. So I'm trying to do justice to perform the DPO role. So as you heard that in that keynote address, that CISO and DPO roles are conflicting, should be different. But I am sure that I'm using this in my advantage, and also for the NPCI advantage. So I'm using the security and the privacy experience, and designing that all those controls accordingly, and trying to use all the technology, be it privacy engineering technology or security engineering technology, so that we should be ahead in the game. So hope I answered you, Krishna.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that clarification. I think it was important because the industry sees you as a leader in this space, and it's fair to understand as to what exactly the role entails. And building on that, I also wanted to understand from your perspective as what is the kind of adoption do you see across India in terms of AI governance practices? And what kind of similarity do you see from a data governance perspective on that? AI governance adoption in the market versus data governance?
So AI governance, unfortunately, there is no robust framework in India. But forward-looking company like NPCI, right? So we are developing, rather we have already developed our own governance framework, of course, based on the NIST, based on the ISO 42000, based on the European Union, and based on the Indian context as well. So forward-looking company, though they are not obliged to create any kind or adhere to any kind of compliance framework like DPDP or any other compliance framework, but forward-looking company, they have created their own AI governance framework. So we did as well. AI governance frameworks is so NPCI is kind of a very tech innovation company for Government of India, right? So we are innovating new products, and I think we should be the among the first on the AI, using the AI technology. and we are using to solve the common man problem, be it fraud side, be it enabling the new product services, feature, etc. So we are a very heavy user of AI. We thought that we should be having some kind of governance framework like what we have for the security side as well. We created our own governance framework based on certain principles. And I'll not take much of time, but the takeaway for you that yes, this has to be the kind of algorithm agnostic, technology agnostic. Few principle definitely it has to be the principle based on the privacy, based on the security, based on the an organization need, accountability, unbiased and ethical, and all those principles we have developed. And just creating just a document doesn't solve a problem. So we are also creating the privacy, rather using the privacy engineering to feed those things in our AI model as well. And just to add what she said about the biasedness, right? So just give you the practical tips, right? How we manage the AI biasedness. So definitely, we do lots of UAT before put it into production, just to check, just to flag any biasness results is there, and we comprehensive UAT is done. UAT is user acceptance test, and then we also do the lots of audit as well on that, and we have the system called flagging the outcomes. So we do flag immediately if we see that somehow it's not aligned, it's not expected, but that outcomes is coming. So we do that as well, and we do that the security side as well. That lots of red teaming, etc., especially prompt engineering attack, etc. So ensure that biasness is not there. So as and when we come to know, and we do that. So this is the right way. If human is developing any algorithm, right, it is called inherent to biasness. It is obvious, right? So how you can ensure that that outcomes is not biased is important, and it is continuous process.
Right. So I think lots of testing is, of course, one of the solutions to mitigate biasness and potential hallucinations in an AI system. And prompt hacking or red teaming is another exercise that a lot of organizations are conducting these days to make sure that AI systems, of course, meet the functional requirements, but also reduce the risk associated with using that AI system. And the important part about the risks arising out of an AI system, it's not just a data privacy or a security risk. It could be a societal risk, it could be an environmental risk, and the risk could also have a potential generational impact, right? So the evaluation that you do of an AI system has to go beyond the pillars of privacy, security, and data. It has to also assess the broader impact from an environment, a society perspective. And if it's generational impact, then of course you have to weigh out the pros and cons, right? I think there was a question from the audience. If you can just pass on the mic there, please. Yeah, it's coming from there.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm from Six AI. We work on making responsible AI practices and getting those implemented in AI systems. And my question's kind of directed at you, sir. So you talked about how NPCI is very heavy on AI, right? And if we look at, one of the places where scam detection has been very useful has been the case of Truecaller, wherein you're able to very quickly flag scam calls. And came across this use case wherein people were in a research setting trying to flag scam transactions. So using like the UPI payments data. So who is the person who's sending the money, who is the receiver, beneficiary, and what is the amount, things like that, and things around that. So one of the problems we came across there, since you are a CISO, I would direct this question to you, is they didn't want to take that burden of having that personal, using that personal data in a model, right? The names are getting exposed and all the PI data along with that is getting exposed. So how would you look at this problem, wherein you are able to get a very good scam detection functionality, but that comes at the added liability of dealing with PI data getting exposed to your model and all of that?
That Truecaller, the using the API data, right? Now that is stopped. So we took that action no, in the light of privacy as well. So that was not kind of approved by us. So that is stopped now. So answer is that yes, right. This is, as I said, journey. You have to keep track on all your AI-based models, what they are generating, how it is consumed, what kind of output, and what kind of regulatory requirement is there around that, right? As a CISO and DPO, you have to keep track of all those development happening, who's using and how it is being used, and what purpose, right? That's why one of the principle we have that has to be aligned with our organization objective. So these are the few KPI, and we also created few KRI to track all those. So these are the practical tips I can give you. The tracking is important, and knowing the entire supply chain is also important. Who is consuming and how it is being consumed, what purpose it is being used, just unauthorized use, whether consent is there or not there, right? So it's a use or misuse by any third party. So there are many nuances around this. You should know that whatever you have developed so far, as a product, which or AI model, it has to be used, within the purpose. These are the few things, and we always, on top of that.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi, panel. Thank you so much for this discussion. I'm actually a legal counsel for this app called Hunch, which is a dating cum social media app. My question is obviously open to the panel, but specifically directed to Pravalika ma'am, because you work at Google, and you will be privy to the concept of moderation and moderation practices. So my question is specifically related to how to navigate compliance today, especially for a social media intermediary, and the kind of compliances that are coming in, especially with mainly advisories and the recent POXO judgment, where moderation is completely driven by AI. And essentially, what we're being asked to do is disclose user private information based on very little data that are like completely automated driven moderation systems are detecting. And considering that we were talking about bias as well, whatever data we will feed our like moderation systems, that's exactly what it's going to use to detect this particular piece of content which it considers is kind of suspicious as per the recent Coxa judgment as well. Just to give a bit of context to the panel as well as people who might not be familiar with this judgment, essentially anything which is even slightly conspicuous of CSAM content or might be considered which is suspicious of perhaps any kind of suspicious activity that falls under the scope of that, that is essentially reportable for by platforms like us. But AI platforms are completely dependent on us to feed that data to them in order for them to detect such kind of content on our platform. So how do we solve for that? Because first, there is a privacy concern. Second is the compliance burden that we are bearing as social media platforms who have to do these moderation practices as part of our compliance. So I would obviously the question is open to the panel, but specifically, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I just want to make sure that I understood the context right. So you're saying that there is a challenge involved in actually identifying this sort of content, and identification is a problem, and then you're saying that even the reporting of this is a problem, right? So when you're saying reporting is a problem, are you saying that because you're having to give out personal information or share personal information while reporting? Is that am I understanding it right?
The reason why this is going to be a concern is because you're depending on the AI to detect those users who are potentially suspicious. So the bias that we have been talking about, it's a very fair line. And how do we navigate that? Because obviously, in case the AI is detecting a user which may not even qualify under the scope of what is required and what is
Right.
reportable, then in that situation we are breaching privacy anyway, and we are also failing compliance.
Right, so I think I'll have to stop you there because I feel that the questions has a lot of parts, and you can potentially have a chat post this panel discussion at the networking event, because you'll have to break it down to different parts and go over all those areas, and then I think it will just eat up some more time of the panel we have left. So don't worry, we'll make sure that both of you can connect, and we'll get back to the questions. And before that, I have a question for Mr. Arnab, and don't worry, we still have 10 more minutes to go, so we can cover that time really well. Mr. Arnab, my question to you is, when it comes to the challenges of ensuring DPDPA compliance, and specifically with the adoption of AI, a lot of things may change on how organizations perceive it. So what do you think are some challenges that you have seen in terms of adoption of data privacy requirements, and how are the implementation process being affected because of the adoption of AI systems? And strictly from a legal perspective, of course.
Sure. Thank you, Krishna. So, first thing, I think you know the kind of challenges that I am looking at on a day-to-day basis when we are dealing with AI, especially data privacy-related challenges. But now that the DPDP Act has come in, and I shouldn't be saying this, but hopefully the rules will come in, right? So, we are anticipating some key compliance challenges, I can say. Around one is, of course, the limitation of purpose. Because the DPDP is giving us certain broad, you could say, principles that we need to adhere and comply to. So as a company, we are focusing and by the way, we are also AI powered, and but in our case, we actually have live products out in the market, and which is servicing large enterprise customers. So there's a fair bit of AI involved in several of our customer communication products. So the one thing that we have found problematic, or rather challenging for us, is the limitation of purpose, limiting the purpose of the data. Because what is happening, and this I saw firsthand myself, that a lot of the training data for the AI, it can serve kind of multiple purposes beyond its original intent. We have used training data to train different models, but the data has remained kind of consistent, right? And that is something which I personally feel is a challenge, because the purpose for which we are collecting that data is actually expanding because of my business needs, right? The other issue that we face is, I would say, enforcement of consent, because a lot of the data that we are picking up, right? Getting explicit consent from my data subjects is difficult, because for me to foresee the exact purpose and use of that data is a little fuzzy, because AI and my models are changing, my results are changing, right? So these are two large issues that we face. The another issue that we actually face in our day-to-day work, and something that Shri mentioned, is explainability. A lot of the AI models that we are working on are black boxes.
Yeah.
And my CTO tells me that some of it is intentional, because we do not want our models kind of being decompiled or read through. Now the problem with that is, DPDP gives us the mandate of kind of having transparent AI systems, but my AI model is not explainable, right? I'm designing it in that way, if I am, right? So that is an issue that we are actually currently brainstorming.
Absolutely. I think it also leads you to a question whether how much transparency is actually required, because To an extent, of course, you want to protect your company's IP, but at the same time, you have to be transparent to your data principles.
Because there's a lack of standard guidelines around
Absolutely.
transparency, right?
I think just like how we have taken GDPR as a benchmark for implementing privacy across organizations and industries, maybe the EU AI Act could be a good benchmark or at least a reference point to take that forward. Right. With that, I think I'll just open the floor for one last question from the audience, and then we would close this panel, and you can meet the panel members post this discussion. Yeah, if you can pass over the mic, please, to the gentleman there.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. I have a question for Shri. So my question is very simple. What could be the challenges related to the processing of personal information while training these AI models?
So first of all, you obfuscate and you pretty much de-identify before training. So that's like the bedrock. So you do not use personal information in training data, period. So I think that's the first step. And then typically we also have consent to our users to make sure that, hey, do you consent to your data being used for like training purposes and so on? So when you see that, it doesn't mean that you're going to actually see a lot of PII flowing into it. You're actually trying to de-identify, de-obfuscate, remove as much personal information as possible, because that's not a practice that we're trying to encourage in
Absolutely, because in that case, if you use that personal data and take consent and someone withdraws their consent.
Right, exactly. Right. And that causes a much more bigger
Absolutely.
churn about actually trying to unlearn and everything, right? So that's how we try to do that. And there is also certain techniques of like segregating the models and like making sure that it's easier when you're trying to unlearn, like you're trying to break the training and like the model in such a way that when you're trying to unlearn and like remove fragments of like data and so on, it's much more easier to do that. I also wanted to just quickly highlight on this topic of data provenance and lineage, which is really crucial, since you were talking about explainability as well. That's like kind of an extension to that topic. And I think lineage is also important, because you want to know from like the start to end of that life cycle of that model, like how it was modified, what was it trained on, like, and so on. So that is also a very powerful concept.
Perfect. I think with that, I'll have to close this panel discussion as well. Please catch hold of the panel members during the lunch and ask for any further questions.
Thank you everyone for the great insights shared. I request you to be on stage for 5 more minutes. We have speaker mementos to distribute. I request Akash to do the felicitation. Thank you, Amit sir, for sharing your insights. Thank you, Amit sir, for the great session. Can we all have a round of applause? Thank you, Praveen sir, for sharing your insightful session. Thank you, Arnab sir, for joining us today. Thank you, Yusuf sir, for joining us today. Thank you, Pravalika ma'am, for joining us today.